Judith is head of the Pavement Management Unit at the North Carolina Department of Transportation, where she retired in 2006. She was the past president of the Southeast Pavement Preservation Partnership and a member of TSP2. She was vice chair of the AASHTO Joint Technical Committee on Pavements and the chair of the Pavement ME Task Force. She is active in TRB and the chair of the Standing Committee on Pavement Preservation, AHD 18, and a member of the Committee on Pavement Rehabilitation and Pavement Management. If you will all welcome Ms. Corley.
Thank you. You did fine. Yeah, my presentation this afternoon is actually based on my last assignment that I had before my retirement on September 1st, which was to put together the framework, and 80% was what I promised and what I delivered, 80% of the Transportation Asset Management Plan. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that. So what it will be in the presentation, well, I'm going to talk a little bit about what the Transportation Asset Management Plan is required to include for those of you who didn't read the 400 pages of the Notice of Proposed Rulemaking. Talk a little bit about 3 aspects of that plan that used pavement management system data, and that would be our assets and their condition, the gap analysis, and the life cycle cost analysis. And then I'll finish up with some quick conclusions. It's, I think you'll find it kind of straightforward. It's not a complicated topic. The Transportation Asset Management Plan gives a broad view of all the assets for which the agency is responsible, the cost of those assets, and an approach to funding infrastructure condition for a 10-year period. That is not something that agencies have historically done. I think there were a few agencies that did, but the vast majority focused their attention on their capital improvement program, their STIP, and they had a prioritization program for that, but not necessarily for preservation, maintenance, rehab, and other such items. So the components of the TAMP, first you have to somehow provide a listing of all the pavement and bridge assets and their condition. I don't expect that's going to change. A gap analysis, and I am going to cover that in more detail, including both traditional and non-traditional gaps. The traditional ones would be the studies that pavement management systems engineers have been doing ever since these computerized systems became widespread. And those include things like, what condition would my network be in if I increased the budget by 20%? What would I get if they cut it by 10%? And that kind of thing. That's a traditional gap analysis. I'll show you some results of that. But in addition, there was a discussion of other gaps in the agency. This really related to stovepiping within the agency, who isn't talking to whom, and what information needs to be shared that isn't being shared. So those are what I call non-traditional gaps. I'm not really going to talk about those because that isn't something that was used the pavement management system. It was more of an agency conversation that was required. I'll talk also about the system level life cycle cost analysis. We in North Carolina have done life cycle cost analysis for projects for many years. When you do a systems level life cycle cost, it's a whole new ballgame and much more difficult to get your arms wrapped around. Those are the components that I'm going to be discussing in my presentation, but there are a few other components of the asset management plan: risk analysis, and then the 10-year financial plan, the funding approach, and the future TAMP activities, that little chapter is who owns the TAMP, who is responsible for updating it, and what improvements does the agency hope to make in the next edition. So that's kind of the picture of what the asset management plan is. Okay, in the listing of assets and their condition, most agencies have been doing this as part of their HPMS reporting. I use the PMS to get our current inventory. The NHS is required of all states, but we included in North Carolina non-NHS roads as well. And the reason for that was that we don't have county roads in our state. They're all state roads. So those local roads that we maintain really are a significant drag on our budget. So you'll see on some of the subsequent slides kind of the magnitude of that issue. In addition to the PMS, I also had to do some consultations with our inventory, GIS, and mapping units to make sure I got numbers that were consistent with our HPMS submissions. Okay, so this is, fortunately, these screens are huge, so I think you'll be able to see them. This is the breakdown of our NHS miles, 21,800 roughly. It is a large system. I do want to point out a few things that you might find interesting. That non-system, 165.4 miles, that puts us in probably the lowest of any of the states as far as non-system roads on the NHS. Some states have as many as 65% of their NHS roads are maintained by other agencies. So I feel like we are really lucky that we have the ability to make sure we have a lot of control over all of that mileage. And just so you know, the 932 miles of secondary roads on the NHS, those are they're secondary roads, but they really ought to be U.S. highway type roads. For any of you who are familiar with Raleigh or Charlotte, that includes Providence Boulevard in Charlotte, which is an 8-lane road, and it includes Wade Avenue in Raleigh, which is 4-lane divided controlled access. So we have these anomalies. I'm sure other states do as well. Okay, this gets, the problem with trying to talk about PMS data is that PMS systems by definition are large spreadsheets. But I did want to give you a sense for how our interstates, and this is exactly how I broke them down in the asset management plan. I talked about mileage of asphalt interstates, jointed concrete interstates, CRC interstates, and then that row that is missing interstates. For those of you who are wondering what that is, it isn't that they are lost. Those are data, those are miles of interstates for which we did not collect in the calendar year condition IRI, whatever the third one was. In the notice of proposed rulemaking, any segment for which you did not collect the data in the current year is rated as poor. Notice on that missing interstates row, 137 miles, 100% of it was put in percent poor. Okay? I haven't seen the final rules. None of us have. I'm hoping that some more amenable and realistic solution to that comes out in those final rules, but I did do it according to the notice of proposed rulemaking. So that's what that is. And so you can see the total interstate rating. Notice our missing interstates are 137 and a little bit miles out of almost 6,000 miles. So it isn't like we were jumping over huge stretches of interstate, but roads are under construction or there's accidents. There's many reasons why an automated distress vehicle might have to skip a section. Okay, and now I've included here the non-NHS just to give you a sense of the mileage. Notice here that in the non-NHS, we do have some interstate roads. These are roads that are interstate that have not yet made it through our GIS system into the miles, so I just broke it out as interstate with a footnote. We also have, and we have asphalt and concrete interstate in that situation. Those are recent constructions, actually. And then notice the mileage on secondary roads. 121,000 miles of secondary roads are on the state system. So you can see why we need to include that in our asset management plan, because even at the low cost of secondary road treatments, 2 cents a mile, it adds up. You know, whatever dollar figure you put, it still adds up when you have 121,000 miles of it. So, and overall, the conditions were as you would expect. The highest conditions on the interstate, the primary down a little bit, and then the secondary, the percent poor has climbed to a little less than 12%. So kind of the progression you would expect. Okay, and so that's all I'm going to say about that whole business about what are our assets and what are their condition. That's essentially how I put it in the asset management plan, with a lot of discussion about what those numbers mean. The gap analysis is a chapter where a state has an opportunity to query their PMS and run various funding scenarios to see what the impact will be on their system condition over a 10-year period. The colors on my computer at home were much brighter than this, but you're going to have to bear with this because this is what we have. So the kind of gold color is the budget reduced by 20%. The light blue is if you continue the current budget for the 10-year period, and dark blue is if you increase that budget. So, you know, as you might expect, the current funding trails off towards the end of the 10 years, and that 20%, we actually see some improvement in pavement condition over time. We did break this down by system, and what we found when we did this was that the pavement condition rating, even when you increase the budget by 20%, the pavement condition rating on the interstates went down. And the reason it went down was that the system, because it's going to go for the lowest cost treatments, it's the most bang for the buck, it chose to take wonderful care of the secondary roads and leave those higher cost interstate projects out. And this is shown in this next slide, the interstates for that 10-year funding projection. And then just so you see the other side of that, oh yeah. Now on for the secondary roads, that 10-year funding analysis, at our current funding level, it holds even, but that's at the expense of the interstates. So you have to be careful in gap analysis that you don't draw the wrong conclusions based on what your data says. You really have to look into the data to see the message. In addition, we have divisions, we don't have districts. You all call them districts, we call them divisions. I looked division by division and looked at their contract resurfacing. With the current budget is the light blue, and the dark blue is the funding that would be required to maintain the level of service. So you can see this is Division 10, that's where Charlotte is located, that's the biggest city in the state. And you can see for contract resurfacing, at least for the middle years, it's not too bad, and then we have various gaps at the beginning and the end. On the preservation side, we have the opposite gap where to maintain the level of service, we need additional funding in years 5, 6, 7, 8 to balance, to maintain the level of service. So I did this for all 14 divisions. And then I love doing this stuff. Pavement management people are such geeks. I just sat in my office and I did everything I could think of to do. So this is all 14 divisions, and it shows the preservation gap is in dark blue and the contract resurfacing gap is in light blue. Notice how huge the contract resurfacing gap is for most of the divisions. Okay? And you think, ooh, this is really bad. Notice this is for the primary roads only. So that's interstates and US routes, the dominant piece. When we get to the secondary roads, though, notice how things have changed. We now have excess contract resurfacing money and some deficit on the preservation. When I got this, this was the most exciting thing that came out of our asset management plan. Hold back your excitement. I was really excited because what we showed was that the divisions could themselves close the gap between contract resurfacing and pavement preservation by just reallocating primary to secondary or secondary to primary. That's not going to be true in every state. Even better news is they already make that decision on how that money gets split. They have the authority to do this. Usually in pavement management, you find out something like this, you say, oh, this is cool, and then you share it downtown and they say, oh, well, we can't do that because by statute we have to split it X and Y. This is something they can fix. It's very exciting information. So that's the gap analysis. That's kind of what I want to show. Different states are going to do different types of gap analyses. It just depends on your state and what you think is most meaningful. When I retired, this was not complete. The last gap analysis they're going to have to do is a gap analysis on funding to meet their targets. The targets aren't going to be set until the final rules come out. So that is one more component to the gap analysis. The last section I'm going to discuss with you all is the system level life cycle cost analysis. This is a real challenge. That's all it was pretty amazing. I got to this part and then I slogged my way through this life cycle cost analysis. It took me a couple months, 1 to figure out how to do it, and then 2 to actually make it happen. I subdivided our pavement system. I'm going to show you more of this subdivision. You have to break it into pieces that kind of make sense cost-wise. So for interstate, it was how many lanes it is and whether it's flexible or rigid. For other NHS and US routes, it was high, medium, and low traffic. And for NC routes and secondary routes, it was also high, medium, and low traffic. And for each road category, I used whatever traffic breakpoint was in our pavement management system. That way you can use your pavement management system directly to get the number of miles for every category. So that was good. So for every category, at this point, we sent out a survey to all of our county maintenance engineers, division maintenance engineers, and so forth. It was actually quite a detailed study, survey on what treatments do you do for this category of road, what do you do for that category of road, and what series of treatments would you expect to put in over the life of the pavement. How much do those treatments cost, and how long do you think they'll last? And then I sat in my office and I developed little cumulative distribution functions on all of those aspects of the treatments. And from that, I used those things to develop a typical series of treatments over the 50-year analysis period. Unfortunately, this was me not thinking ahead. I picked this medium traffic range flexible pavement. If I had picked medium traffic or low traffic flexible pavement, it would have been all preservation treatments. I'm sorry, it was just, wasn't thinking. So I have a whole series now of these treatment plans. And then I use the surveys to figure out those distribution functions and the costs. And then trying to kiss up to my favorite Federal Highway Administration officials, I used their software to analyze each one of those subdivisions. So I ran real cost dozens of times to run every one of those scenarios for a 1 mile length of road, and then multiplied by the number of miles from the pavement management system to get the life cycle costs for the road category and the traffic level. I want you to know I was doing this when I had already announced my retirement. I think I should get a medal for having continued working right up to the end, but that's okay. For each treatment, if you've ever, how many of you have used real cost? Okay, a few. If you use real cost, you put in alternatives. Usually one of them is to do nothing. You just build it and let it rot in place. The next one you might do some other treatments, but I put in 3 for each one. One was the do nothing from construction to reconstruction. The second one was always intermittent treatments with preservation on a regular basis. That was my dream treatments. And then the third one was delayed treatments with increased cost due to patching. This is the bottom line. The do nothing, I was relieved to find it cost us a great deal more money, $3.6 billion in equivalent annual cost. The intermittent treatments with lots of preservation, 2.4 billion. And then the delayed treatments, not that much different, 2.4 billion. Probably should have jacked up the cost of patching a bit, but I didn't, so that's the way it is. So, one of the findings that came out of this, though, all of these cost figures were dependent on those field surveys. Our field people had a really good handle on what it costs to do flexible pavement treatments. That's like 97% of our system. They really understand what it costs, how long it lasts, and what they do. They had a lot more difficulty on rigid pavements. And so one of the items that I left behind for people in the agency to work on was getting good information to feed into the rigid pavement portion so that those distribution functions had smaller standard deviations. So they're going to be working on that. That's in that last chapter on next steps, so there's hope there. So, kind of conclusions. The pavement management system is a critical part in developing your TAMP. You have, I don't know how you do this without a good pavement management system. We have historically used our pavement management systems to provide asset inventory and condition. I mean, we've been doing that for the last 20 years. We can provide, with the modern systems, good quality gap analyses for a wide range of scenarios. And then the systems are also used to break down your system into blocks for the life cycle cost piece. And then I just have to mention, you gotta also work with your bridge folks and your bridge management system. And for me, that was actually the biggest challenge. Pavement people are just fundamentally a little different from bridge people. So, on that note, thank you for your attention. Are there any questions? Yeah, Ed.
I have a question. It's more of a comment.
Okay.
It seems to me that even though when you did the life cycle cost analysis for the do nothing and alternative 2 and 3, even though they might cost the same, don't they give you different conditions? So that's where the rest of the hidden money you're passing on maybe to the users or something like that.
Right. You're right there. I did not include user cost in that life cycle cost analysis.
Okay.
It's hard enough to do it with, with just the construction and the, material costs without trying to estimate user costs.
Hey,
Luis, my friendly neighborhood Fed.
Friendly Fred. Concerning LCCA, what type of, or what was the amount of years that you use on your analysis period for the LCCA?
I used 50 years.
50? Okay. You did the probabilistic or the deterministic?
I did the probabilistic for treatment timing, treatment duration, and treatment cost.
Okay, thank you.
How did you calculate your average unit cost for your treatments? Was it a statewide average? I know in Illinois our unit costs vary widely from Chicago to the rest of the state, so.
Right, and I did use statewide averages, but just like you, in North Carolina, there is an additional cost at the coast where a lot of materials have to be shipped in comparison with the vast majority of the state. We do, in our pavement management system, use a cost multiplier for those costs, but I did not use that in this life cycle cost because then I would have had to break out each of those divisions by area of the state, and I'm not sure I could have justified the additional work, for the little bit of improved accuracy. Any other questions? Thank you all.